All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thanks for joining our session. Before we get started, just a quick note that this session is being recorded. My name is Daniel Raisman, and I'm here with my colleague Stelios Minas, who's based in our Singapore office. We work at AIR Worldwide, which is an extreme event modeling firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'll start with a brief overview of our firm and our efforts to narrow the protection gap before passing it over to Stelios for an overview of an innovative tool that we've developed over the past several years. So AIR was founded in 1987, and over the past 30 years, we've developed models in over 110 countries worldwide, covering a range of perils from tropical cyclones, earthquakes, severe thunderstorms, floods, and in more recent years, pandemics and cyber attacks. We have over 700 professionals worldwide across 9 offices, and we have a much larger family as part of the Verisk Analytics family. So fortunately, catastrophes are relatively rare, but relying on historical data and traditional actuarial methods can be insufficient in assessing the future risk. And additionally, the constantly changing exposure landscape limits the usefulness of past loss experience. So to talk about this small data problem that we deal with when we're talking about these severe events, let's take a look at an example. So if we look at the year 2017 in the US, there are hundreds of thousands of structural fires, a few million deaths, millions of car accidents, but only 4 hurricanes and even fewer major earthquakes. So we're really targeting these low frequency but high severity events. To put this small data problem in perspective, let's take ourselves back to 1992. In 1992, if we were an insurance company and we were looking at historical loss experience, and we went back 20 years, we would look at an event like Hurricane Hugo, which caused $3.6 billion of loss, and think this might be the largest event that we could experience. You may be able to trend this number a bit and expand that out, but ultimately, give or take a few billion, it may seem like the largest loss that one could experience. Well, fast forward to 1992, Hurricane Andrew came into South Florida and devastated the region, causing over $16 billion in insured loss and leading 12 insurance companies to go insolvent. Using even the 30-year history wouldn't have predicted an event the size of Andrew. So if we look at the same chart now with Andrew plotted, you can see that Hugo looks like a minor blip across the full spectrum of these historical events. So insurance companies for the past 30 years have been using catastrophe models as a tool to help them understand the loss potential that they face and help them to get more comfortable with the risk from various perils and make informed data-driven decisions in their capital allocation and their expansion around the globe. The framework shown on this slide underpins all of our natural peril models. So we think of this in 3 forms. So starting with the hazard, we model many thousands of simulations worth of events. So you can think of this as modeling the year 2021, 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 times. So in the hazard component, we're looking at where events might occur, how intense they might be, and how frequently they might occur. We overlay that on the exposure, which is effectively what assets are at risk. Is it homes, businesses, commercial properties, industrial facilities, schools, hospitals, etc. We then want to understand if this given home or given hospital gets hit with a magnitude 7 earthquake or has hurricane force winds, what damage can we expect? That's where the engineering component comes in. So understanding how will that structure react to the given hazard. And finally, once we understand that, we can actually calculate a modeled loss and understand that financial loss from both at the property level, but also aggregating that up to the portfolio as a whole and to a country as a whole. While insurance against hurricanes in the US has come a long way over the past many years, the protection gap globally is frustratingly high. So this chart above shows different pie charts for different regions around the globe. And the total pie shows the economic loss, the total economic loss predicted based on our models. The light blue portion of the pie shows the insured portion, and the dark blue, the uninsured. So you can see that regardless of where you are, the portion that's insured is still very small. And in many areas, this is largely due to earthquake and flood risk. So one of the motivating factors behind our work, and particularly in the global resilience practice that I'm a part of, is helping governments and NGOs to prepare for the impacts of these disasters before they occur. So we continue to make investments in data and models to help support risk management in developing markets as well as more developed insurance markets. One of the ways that we help to narrow the protection gap is our support of disaster risk finance initiatives with the World Bank. So on the screen, you can see a few of the projects. And while each of these is unique in nature and the perils that they cover and the assets that the governments were concerned with, the underlying, the commonality that they share is the fact that they began with an assessment of the risk. So we basically took exposure and we quantified the risk to those regions. And then that output was able to be used to help them seek protection from those events in the form of an insurance program or other financing mechanism. So how do these projects help countries to recover from catastrophes? At a high level, a transaction is established between the government seeking protection and investors or donors. The cat bond or insurance swap effectively serves as an insurance policy protecting against a shock. So basically how this works is if an event meeting certain parameters or a certain magnitude occurs during the risk period, then the investor's money is paid to the government. But if no event meeting the predefined parameters occurs during the risk period, then the investors get back their investment in addition to a coupon or the premium paid by the government for that coverage. So to give a couple of examples, in 2009, we started our support of the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Assessment and Financing Initiative, or PCRAFI. And we actually developed tropical cyclone, earthquake, and excess rainfall models for 15 countries in the South Pacific. The outputs of this effort were not only data files, spreadsheets, geospatial layers, but also these brochures that are shown on the right-hand side, which overviewed the risk profile, showing the exposure and the potential losses. And ultimately, these were used to underpin the insurance transaction, which is today continues to be supported by the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Company. And AIR's model underpins this transaction. And participating countries have received payouts following events over the past several years. Cyclone Ian in 2014, Pam in 2015, Gita in 2018, and most recently Harold earlier this year. We've additionally worked for a number of years with the World Bank in the Philippines, which is highly prone to typhoons and earthquakes. So we started by supporting a private insurance swap. And then last year, the Philippines issued a catastrophe bond protecting from the typhoon risk and earthquakes. And this was historic in that it was the first bond to be issued by a sovereign government in Asia, and also the first to be listed on the Singapore Exchange. So like the transaction in the South Pacific, following a significant event, AIR will download parameters from that event from reporting agencies and actually recreate an event footprint and quantify the modeled loss, which is then used to determine a payout. So the efforts that the Philippines have put into seeking this protection ahead of time are really impactful in helping to prepare them before the events occur financially. In addition to our work with the World Bank, we support numerous other organizations, one of which is GeoHazards International, or GHI, whose mission is to end preventable death and suffering from natural disasters. They focus on helping the world's most vulnerable populations to prepare for disasters and really strive to build capacity locally to provide communities with the tools and allow them to take ownership and really feel connected with the initiatives. So one of the areas that GHI has had recent success is in Bhutan, which is extremely seismically prone due to its location in the Himalayas. AIR has worked in support of 2 projects, with AIR providing technical support and Verisk providing financial support. So starting with the Earthquake Desk Project, which you may have seen in a prior Understanding Risk conference, but effectively these desks were designed to help protect, the idea being that the years it may take to retrofit and build stronger schools may be too long before another event. But if they can place these seismically protected desks in specific schools, they can help to protect the students in the interim. And they were proved to be very effective. So AIR supported this by documenting the existing schools and also providing probable damages and casualty estimates. And through the mapping of the different schools and understanding their relative vulnerabilities, we were able to also help prioritize where the desks were placed in terms of the hazard and also the vulnerability of those structures. The second project, which is shown below, is actually ongoing. And we're working with GHI in Thimphu, in the capital of Bhutan, to help build a customized view of risk and do scenario analyses that will help not only quantify the risk today by we're building out the exposure database in collaboration with GHI and local partners. And then actually this model will be used going forward, ideally to help support mitigation efforts and inform building codes. So these scenarios are actually based on the Global Earthquake Model Foundation's model for Bhutan. And speaking of GEM, AIR has been a long-term partner and supporter, and we've worked closely over a number of years. I mentioned that earthquake risk is one of the driving contributors in the protection gap. So we're working with GEM not only through the project with GHI in Bhutan, but also more generally to make their models available in our flagship Touchstone platform, which is widely used among the insurance community. We recognize that building a worldwide view of risk covering developed and developing countries requires a collaborative effort. Model Builder additionally allows developers to build custom models using the same format that we talked about earlier, that same modeling framework, where they actually build an event, define event footprints, and they can customize their damage ratios. And it presents a particularly good case in areas where there's not existing models. So you may have local experts or universities that want to collaborate to build a model, but what they don't have access to necessarily is the insurance community and the ability to access capital easily to help protect the governments in question. So if they build a model for a new region, they want to be able to disseminate that model. So the hope is that Model Builder helps to provide that platform to leverage that, in addition to providing an enterprise level solution that's already widely accepted. So we're hopeful that Model Builder will expand opportunities to leverage the benefits of catastrophe models and also be useful in the quest to help narrow the protection gap. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stelios, who will take a deeper dive into Model Builder and give you, greater insight. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Let me share my screen. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening also from me. My name is Stelios, and today I'm going to introduce you to Model Builder, and together we are going to explore some of the capabilities of this platform. So let's quickly start with the agenda of the second part of the session. First, we are going to define what an open platform is. We will continue with an overview of Model Builder. And next, we are going to dive deeper in Model Builder components and continue with an example showcase on how to build our own model. The final part will be the conclusion of this presentation, where we are going to provide a workflow overview and also talk about our vision about the future of custom models. Now, before talking about Model Builder or about customized views of risk, we will need to first introduce the term open platform. The word platform can be associated with a number of services and data designed to scale. So we have categorized this for catastrophe modeling. Now, having an open platform includes open and easy to use exposure standards. It also includes transparency, flexibility to adjust our models, and ability to build our own models and deploy them. So let's take a look at each of these aspects and the improvements we have made and continue to make here at AIR. As Daniel mentioned in his part, AIR has always been a company that builds catastrophe models. We are in a position to understand both the complexity of building these models, but also what capabilities a tool requires in order to build a custom model. And we are going to continue to function as a modeling company at core, but we are extending this capability to you, the other users. At this point, we should keep in mind that AIR is not only a modeling company, it is also a software company. And as a software company, we have developed Touchstone, which is the means for accessing our models. But Touchstone is not just that. It is also a platform where at the core of this platform, you can utilize the loss analytics based on our AIR catastrophe models. But we have built so much more than that on the top of that. This range from underwriting solutions, geospatial, and hazard analytics. So in the recent years, we have been making strides towards opening up a Touchstone platform in order to allow users to truly own the risk. This includes model transparency. For example, we can provide access to our location level event intensity information, but also it includes the ability to license third-party hazard data and models, such as ambiental, Eurotempest, ERN, Risk Frontiers, and others. Having said that, today it seems like everybody wants to have their own view of risk. Some organizations see this as their core strength, to develop a refined and truly custom view of risk for various core perils. Others may want to modify an existing model vendor view, which are dominant currently in the market. While there are areas where there are gaps, and some organizations may want to build their models to understand the risks that model builders have not tackled yet. In this slide, we can see some examples of those non-model perils that certain parties may wish to incorporate into their future view of risk. We can have from volcanoes in Iceland to earthquakes in Africa, or flooding in Peru, or even modeling some specialty risks like nuclear plants and so on. Now, at AIR, our vision is to provide a connection between custom model developers and model consumers. And how we are going to do that? First, we need to see how custom models are being run today. In general, custom models depend greatly on the resources and technical aptitude which is available for every developer. Some of them are run in bespoke applications built in programming languages like MATLAB, R, or Python. But now the question that comes to mind is, how are those models operationalized? The bespoke nature of running them in a custom application may lead to many potential issues or errors. Very rarely, these models are capable to handle huge volumes of data and exposures. And one can expect that the developers will need to spend additional time and resources in order to get the models run as intended. And especially when we compare this to other commercially available vendor models, this can create a big issue. The things can become even more complex when it comes to sharing a custom view of risk with other partners or parties. Essentially, every run may become a consulting project tailored for the consumer, and this is not, of course, very scalable. So here at AIR, we are striving to improve upon this by utilizing Touchstone to be the platform of choice for generating and transferring custom views of risk. Specifically, we have developed Model Builder to make this a reality. So we have standardized the process to provide import templates for hazard and vulnerability files. The user can import custom views of risk into Touchstone platform. The Builder component of Model Builder is a standalone application outside Touchstone, where the user can construct and import the necessary files and validate them. Now, once the model is ready for testing, this model can be called up from the list of available catalogs within Touchstone user interface. Okay, before looking into more details about model builder procedure, we need to first better understand the typical catastrophe model components. Many of you may be familiar with this, but I will quickly go through the AIR's common framework for developing models. This is a diagram which highlights that the model typically consists of three components, as Dan mentioned also in his part. We have the hazard component, the engineering, or sometimes referred to as vulnerability component, and then we also have the financial component. What Model Builder does is that it allows you to build hazard and engineering component of the model, which is then deployed into Touchstone. And then it lets you leverage the financial engine that is behind Touchstone. This is an industry standard financial engine, which applies all the policy conditions, calculates the ground up, gross, and net losses, and is also able to roll up your loss numbers in a consistent way. This is a great advantage, and as you do not have to build all those tools because you can leverage what is already available in Touchstone. Okay, we have seen the architecture of a typical catastrophe model. Now we can look into the steps that are followed within Model Builder process in order to build our model. So the first step is to define metadata. This is where the user can select some general information about the model, such as the perils and subperils, the regions and countries that are going to be modeled, and so on. At this point, I would like to highlight that Model Builder allows you to model countries which may not currently included in the models of AIR. In the next three steps, the user will provide a catalog or catalogs, configure intensities, and specify damage. And the final step is to create the model and deploy it in Touchstone. This is a data-driven framework, which allows you to import custom catalogs, hazard intensity, and damage files into what we call AIR custom model engine in Model Builder. The custom event engine then runs each event against your existing exposures. It selects appropriate damage ratio based on the peril type, the intensity of the event, the exposure location, and line of business in order to derive a damage ratio and consequently calculate the loss in a very consistent way. As we mentioned before, in the finished model, Model Builder will leverage the benefits from Touchstone Financial Engine. For example, the user can apply a variety of policy conditions and reinsurance in the insured loss calculation. Or you can also utilize different loss perspectives. Of course, you can take advantage of other functionalities, such as scaling loss analysis in order to handle millions of locations, view various kinds of analysis results, and so on. Okay, so in this part, we are going to go through a case study on how we could use this framework to develop our own model. Say, for example, that you want to develop a South Africa earthquake model and understand your view of risk in this region. So as we said before, the first step is to define the event catalog within the hazard component. The event generation part of the model has to do with event occurrence, and this consists of the characteristics of events, such as their frequency, or how often an event occurs, the size or magnitude, which generally reflects the ability to do damage, and their location, which influences which cities and towns are going to be affected. In the event generation component of the model, we can also create different types of catalogs. We have the stochastic event catalog, where we are going to see in a while what that means. We have the historical catalog, which includes the historical events that have affected the area. And we also have a custom set of events. So talking about the stochastic event catalog, it is based, actually it's developed based primarily on historical event data. especially in areas where we have very high seismic activity, such as Japan or California or other places like this. However, there are areas where we might not have uh, uh, too high seismic activity, or we have very few historical earthquakes with large magnitudes. And in that case, we must rely on what we call auxiliary data, such as data on faults, paleoseismicity information, GIS information, and so on. If we do not incorporate auxiliary data, especially for areas of low seismicity, we may underestimate the level of risk. So let's take an example. Say we are going to create a South Africa earthquake model, as we said before, where we are going to simulate events for 10,000 years across the entire African continent. We will do that by using a seed of historical events. So on the left-hand side, you can see a map with the historical events that have been used in order to develop the simulate set of events that we can see on the right. But how are we going to represent that for a catalog? Actually, we would need to create a file that specifies the event ID, the year and day of the year, which is the absolute minimum information that you need to define a catalog within Model Builder platform. The rest of the fields that are available are optional. Such information include event intensity ID, event description, or other application of factors to modify intensity and damage. Here is a screenshot from Model Builder environment illustrating what we call step 2, provide a catalog. And more specifically, is the page where we are going to import and map the catalog file on the UI of Model Builder. As you can see on this screenshot, we have already imported a catalog file. We have done the mapping, so we made sure that all columns are mapped to the right column names. And once we make sure that we have the catalog size and everything is fine, then we can proceed to the next step, which is the step number 3, where we will be talking about in a while. Okay, after you define a set of events, next step is to define the local intensity of your event. So for each event in the catalog, you will need to have an intensity footprint, say around the epicenter of the earthquake event. Okay, on the right-hand side, you can see a map, which is what we call a shaking map for a certain earthquake event. And the different colors correspond to different intensity footprint levels. So the footprint is actually the local intensity, which is calculated based on source parameters and distance from the source. When talking about earthquake events, these source parameters include information like earthquake magnitude, epicenter location, rupture information, such as length and rupture width or rupture orientation. And altogether, they are used to calculate the local intensities, which for the case of earthquakes are peak ground acceleration or spectral acceleration corresponding to different frequencies and others. Similarly, for other perils, for example, for hurricanes, you are using different types of local intensity, of course, such as local wind speed, which is calculated based on different source parameters, which may include central air pressure, radius of maximum winds, and many more. Okay, so these intensity footprints that we mentioned before are defined within the intensity file for each event in our catalog. In this example, from the Africa earthquake model, you have a number of simulated events. And for every event in your catalog, you would have to define a footprint. This can be done either at a specific location, or you can utilize a more complex option in order to, for example, you can model a uniform gridded resolution. At this point, you should note that Model Builder supports multiple resolutions for intensities of an event. For this example, we have selected just one event in the northern part of South Africa country, as you can see on the bottom of the left map. And we have created the associated intensity footprint at multiple resolution, which is shown on the right-hand side. Here, you can have a uniform gridded file at high resolution, say of 1 kilometer grid, maybe in around the areas close to the epicenter or close to urban areas or other areas where we have high exposures or there is a significant interest. Then around that high resolution area, you may have some low resolution intensity grids, say of 5 and 10 kilometers, at areas where we have lower interest or we just want to have the domain coverage. At this point, we should note that Model Builder does not only allow you to define multiple resolution, but also supports multiple perils and subperils. For example, if you have an earthquake event, you can model intensity for the earthquake shaking, but you can also model other subperils like fire following or other related earthquake-related subperils like landslides and tsunami. The same, of course, applies to other types of perils. Here, we have another screenshot from the Model Builder environment, this time illustrating the step number 3, configure intensities. In this page, you can see in the highlighted column on the left, how we can define the intensity for one peril. In this example, the intensity is earthquake shake. Then below that, we can see that we have two different resolutions. So we have resolution 1 and resolution 2. And we have checked resolution 1, and we can see on the right-hand side, the file that we have imported for that resolution level. The selected resolution is for 1 kilometer, but similarly, we can import a file which is at lower resolution level. Once we make sure that the mapping and the import process have been completed without any problem, we can proceed to the next step. Okay, so we have built our hazard and our intensity component, and now we can move on to the vulnerability module or engineering module. What you see here in the screen is what we call a damage function. This damage function describes the relationship between the earthquake intensity. As you can see on the x-axis, in this case, we have used peak ground acceleration. And this intensity is plotted against the expected damage, which in this case is expressed as mean damage ratio on the y-axis. A damage ratio of 0 at the bottom left of the graph means that there is no damage expected when we have no intensity or we have no acceleration. However, as the intensity is increasing, we would expect to see more and more damage. So we have provided three pictures from different damage levels as we increase the level of intensity. The final point of this damage function is at the top right, where we have a damage ratio of 100%. This is where we expect the damage to be collapsed or totally destroyed. Just to clarify, this is just one damage function for a particular type of construction occupancy, age and height combination. However, depending on how many construction types you want to model or how many lines of business, we can have a very large set of damage function combinations supported within your model. As we said before, with Model Builder, you can build very simple models, but you also have the option to develop more complex models. And here we have a few examples on how we can scale out our models. So you might, for example, want to support multiple coverages and different perils to your model. So as you can see on the top left box in this slide, your coverage A, which corresponds to our building damage, depends on the intensity. So we can also have other types of coverages, such as content damage and business interruption, which correspond to coverage C and D, which are actually a function of the building damage. And this is because those are secondary damage. In this way, in other words, we can say that we have the flexibility to define at this stage the x-axis of the damage function for the corresponding coverage type. Another thing that you can do is that you can also configure what we call location level modifications. For example, you may want to take into account local soil conditions and you have come up with a layer of modification in order to apply it to a typical intensity file. You can choose to do that with this location modification option. Very similar to this, you could also do a regional modification for damage functions that you have developed. An example could be that you want to account for local building code enforcement, or you want to account for some regional building characteristics, Say, for example, that there are specific regions. In specific regions, the building may have basements, which may have a direct impact on the selected damage functions. Finally, Model Builder also allows you to define different age and height bands to describe the different damage functions. And here is an example of the height bands that we can support. Okay, so once you have completed the engineering or vulnerability part, the final step is to create the model, as you can see in the model page, in the model builder page that we are showing here. In this step, you will perform all the validation checks and consequently run the conversion, which will allow you to deploy this custom model in Touchstone. Okay, so by this point, we have seen Model Builder as a platform. We have discussed the Model Builder components and also went through an example case study on how to build our own model in Model Builder. So in this part, we are going to be talking about the workflow overview. The way we have architected Model Builder helps support multiple workflows and a variety of different use cases for those who are interested. On one hand, we have independent model developers, such as researchers or smaller third-party vendors, who want to reach a larger audience by taking advantage of Touchstone platform. As we said before, this can include research institutes, academics, who can build their own catastrophe model and deploy them in Touchstone. And Model Builder will make this process much easier in order to disseminate the research and views, and also the views of risk to the market. On the other hand, we have the use case of our more advanced clients who need to operationalize their view of risk and share it with their business partners. This may include advanced insurers and reinsurers, brokers working with clients, and others. Okay, so our aim is to continue investing in model builder and also work closely with custom model developers to better understand their requirements and needs. However, we also want to focus on our consumers as well. So not just the typical consumers in the insurance industry, but also better understand the needs of other potential consumers, such as governments, NGOs, and independent research institutes. This process may take this project to a whole different level. Our vision for the years to come is to create what we call a centralized data exchange portal in order to manage and share custom models. Imagine something like a mobile app store where you can browse what is available from the various model builders out there. Licensing models through a seamless experience, moving from browsing to researching to procurement to validating the model, and then use it in production. This will open up a whole new world of possibilities with the Touchstone platform. So to wrap up this talk, here are a few key takeaways for this session. First of all, Model Builder is a flexible and reliable toolkit that will allow you to build your own custom catastrophe model and also deploy it in a platform like Touchstone. It is designed in such a way to make it easier to create and share independent, transparent view of risk. And finally, Model Builder will provide a platform to allow even to smaller model developers to share their models with a variety of consumers that have very different needs. And with this, we've reached the end of this presentation. I would like to thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to have your questions if you have any. Thanks again.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, um, happy to wrap up. Feel free also to send us any questions that you have. We'd be happy to address them offline or have a separate conversation with anyone that would like to discuss. But thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks, Stelios.